Hello, it's Lucas Cadden back with another episode of Narconon and Scientology Chronicles. And in this one, as I mentioned in the last one, I wanted to talk about Narconon and the International Association of Scientologists, or also known as the IAS. Now, the relationship between these two entities is a lot deeper than probably a lot of people realize. And my first exposure to the IAS, which is the membership organization of Scientologists. It's a totally separate money making thing. They supposedly raise money for different campaigns to give money for stuff, but really what it's used for is just to amass more and more money. They don't give out that much. It's more about taking. So what they do typically is they have different levels, and at first they give just about anybody who first starts out in Scientology as a free 6-month membership to the IAS. And then it goes up from there. You become like a lifetime member. And when I first started, a lifetime membership was $3,000. It later got increased to $5,000. And then you become a sponsor, which used to be $5,000. Then they increased it to $10,000. And then you keep moving up, and you have like patron. Patron was this level that everybody was supposed to reach, and it was $40,000. And patron, I think, eventually became $50,000, and it keeps on going up from there. And if you take a look at some of these different statuses, it goes all the way up to like patron laureate Gluteus Maximus, his holiest, highest $1 million donation, and I say that jokingly, but really some of these names are just absolutely ridiculous because they kept on having to come up with new names and bigger trophies for people. And if you'll check out some of the articles on Tony Ortega's site about these various IAS donation statuses around the world, that's what you see. And you see some of these multi-mega millionaire Scientologists who are left. Tony likes to call them whales, for example. And they keep on going. So that's sort of what the IAS is. Now, their connection to Narconon specifically, and my relationship with that at Narconon was when I first started trying to take my first Scientology course. It was at the old church in Atlanta. And then I was recruited to go work for Narconon and go to Narconon in Boston and work with Bobby Wiggins and do drug education, and then eventually go out to Narconon of Oklahoma because they were going to move to Arrowhead. And the significance in all that is the IAS purchased Narconon Arrowhead, purchased the building, the property, and then paid to renovate it for Narconon to move from Chilocco to Arrowhead. So the IAS used IAS funds, Scientology funds. They purchased and renovated this property, and then they gave that to Able, but was then later put under I think Social Betterment Properties Corporation, so a separate property holding company. But that money came from the IAS. And when I went up to Boston, that October, the IAS event typically is in October, and it's an event where they get a lot of people together. It's held live, or used to be held live, in St. Hill in England. And people fly in. It's very, it's very the elitist of Scientology and that sort of thing. But they show this event all throughout the world afterwards. Usually the week afterwards, they used to show it on a DVD. A DVD would get shipped everywhere. So I was in Boston. I had just recently gotten there. And at these IS events, you're supposed to give a lot of money. That's what their purpose is to raise money. So I was used by Bobby Wiggins, who was an IAS Freedom Medal winner. And the IAS gives out these freedom medals to people who are supposedly, forwarding the cause of Scientology. And it's for people who are not Sea Org members or not church staff members, but they could be staff members of something like a Narconon or Applied Scholastics or that sort of thing. And they give them these medals in recognition of advancing Scientology in whatever their sector is. So Bobby Wiggins had gotten a freedom medal, an IAS freedom medal, for his work doing drug education in the schools in Boston and throughout New England. And so here I was up there at Boston. I went to the IAS event that night. Bobby Wiggins brought me up. They had just shown this whole graphic about how the IAS funded Narconon Arrowhead and they're about to move. And it came in and it showed like this airport that was at the state park, but they did the CGI graphic flyover of a jet landing in and saying it even has its own airport. It was Jeff Pomerantz who did those narrations. But anyways, and so that was, I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And it was a lot of hoorah around this whole thing. And that was like my first real exposure to the IAS and what these events are. And I was like, wow, this is a big deal. Like, I'm going to Arrowhead. They just featured Arrowhead, and Bobby's a Freedom Medal winner, and he gets treated all around. Behind the scenes, I found out a little bit more, which is what Bobby did is he would go and do these IAS fundraisers, and he would help. He would be given targets. Like, you need to raise X amount of dollars at this event. And they give them briefings about different things. And sometimes it would correlate with the larger IAS events, like the annual one. Sometimes it would just be a local fundraising event that they would send people out for. And they would be given targets of how much money they're supposed to raise, 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever the amount is for that event. And then he would help raise that money by putting people on the spot and telling stories and doing things like that, and bringing me up and saying, look, this guy's going to work at Arrowhead, and look at all that, and you need to support the IAS and give some money now. And that's kind of how it went. And these Freedom Medal winners and other IAS regs, previous video talking about regging, would get a commission on all the money that they raised. So that was his main source of income. Bobby didn't make a lot of money doing actually drug education anymore. He made most of his money by then doing IAS events. So fast forward from there, I was still in Boston doing training with him, going around to schools, talking to kids, and he said, hey, I've got another IAS event in New York. Why don't you come on down? So I drove down to New York City, and we went down to the church in New York, and they had rented a room, I think at like a hotel around the corner or something like that. I forgot exactly where it was, but it wasn't inside the church for whatever reason. And they did this event, this money-raising event. And again, it was, high pressure, lots of hip hip hoorays, lots of, over the ramparts, and we're going to take the psychs out and do all this stuff, like all the things that they say they're going to do. And of course, he talked about Narconon again within that. Mentioned Narconon Arrowhead, that I was there to do that, so on. So keep going, and this became a pattern where not only Bobby, but there were other Narconon people who got IAS Freedom Medals, including Gary Smith, who's the executive director of Narconon Shalako and then Narconon Arrowhead. Jeannie Trahan, who was, I think, like the first female graduate of Narconon, or one of the first female graduates of Narconon. There were some guys in Narconon Sweden because of the drug education they were doing with, in Europe. And going on. So there was lots of connections to the IAS and Narconon specifically. And when I got to Oklahoma, for example, there was another IAS event held down in Dallas at the church in Dallas. And so I went down there and brought some other staff members and trainees from Narconon Arrowhead, and we participated in the IAS event. But they would also have IAS regs call into Narconon centers and ask, sometimes they'd call me and ask directly, hey, who makes the most money on your staff? Like, who do you think we can get a good donation from? And they'd start mining people. And that was also a key. Like, I rode around with Bobby to one of these things where he would usually be paired up with someone in the Sea Org who worked for the IAS. And they would go around and sometimes to these people's houses who didn't RSVP for the event. Like, if they weren't coming or they had something else going, they would then go visit them at their houses and ask them for specific amounts of money. So they would do this pre-regging of money before they did the actual event. And they would say, I heard that he just had, he just had some stock that sold, or he just got a promotion, or he gets a quarterly bonus, and his wife told me this, or, she just got an inheritance from her mother passing away, or whatever. So they would make notes about people's personal financial details and then go in and hit them specifically on those things, trying to say, well, you need to give to our different campaign for Narconon or for, Applied Scholastics or for whatever. And interestingly enough, that actually happened with my father too. One of the IS Regis at Flag had come up to me when I was living in Clearwater and said, "Hey, I heard your dad has this amount of money in one of his accounts. Like, you need to call him up and tell him we need this percentage of that money, that he needs to donate that." And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to call my dad and tell him he needs to give this amount of money, and especially that you took personal information from him that he gave in confidence about his financial situation that you're now going to use against him to try and get more money. So I mentioned, in the previous video about how they had shown up at their house, for example, and tried to do that, and that was, this was after that even, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. Well, the IS and the Narconon goes hand in hand in many different ways. Like, that's where some of the money came from, some of these other places too, and these other campaigns, and how it continues to go. And Rena Weinberg, who used to be the president of ABLE International, she had gotten a Freedom Medal as well. And I remember her telling me that actually both she and Gary Smith had told me, for example, that Tom Cruise wanted a Freedom Medal, that he wanted a Freedom Medal more than he wanted an Oscar. And of course, he eventually got one. He didn't just get a Freedom Medal; he got the Freedom Medal of Valor, which is larger and more significant from his buddy Miscavige. But that's kind of how this whole thing was that it was all centered around money and status. And everybody was out for more money and more money and more money. And the IS was just another vehicle to do that. And Narconon was very intimately intertwined in that, to where, again, they would call up a bunch of staff who were even non-Scientologists and said, you need to flow money to the IS because Arrowhead wouldn't be there without it. You wouldn't have a job. You wouldn't have had a saved life if the IS didn't fund Arrowhead. Like, those are some of the things that they would actually tell people to try and get them to give money. And there was no like sincerity to it. It was only about the statistics at the end of each week, each Thursday at 2 p.m., how much money they had collected. And that's really what it comes down to. That's what the end game of Scientology is how much money can you collect. And it was interesting to see Tony's article about all the orgs coming back to life now that that things pandemic wise are slowing down, and how it's like, okay, time to get back onto the fundraising thing. Some of it is IS, some of it's Ideal Org, some of it's whatever, but it's all about money. That's the only thing that they're really after, because the people themselves don't matter. They throw them away very easily, whether they are top executives, whether they are influential parishioners, whether they are top donors. There's plenty of multi-million-dollar donors who were instantly discarded when they started to question or speak out against Miscavige or, expose Hubbard's lies, those kinds of things. And, it just goes to show it's all about money. And the IS is one of the most egregious branches of Scientology in that regard. And Narconon, by no means, is actually fully separate from that activity. There you go. There's my rant on this one. Hope you enjoyed some of it. Until next time, for Narconon and Scientology Chronicles, I'm Lucas Catton. Take care.